Wrong seat. Wrong day, gentlemen. You don't belong here.
The voice was sharp, rehearsed, and loud enough to travel the length of the aisle. A uniformed attendant stood rigid, one hand already raised, eyes flicking toward the men in dark jackets closing in. They stopped the single dad mid-aisle and told him he was sitting where he didn't belong. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Security circled him, a trembling child clung to his arm, and a powerful executive watched as the cabin turned hostile. Instead of arguing, the man calmly stood, shielded the child, and corrected something no one else noticed. Minutes later, the same people ordering him away would need him to keep the plane alive. This story is about dignity, hidden mastery, and who power overlooks. Before I show you the exact moment when a routine flight became a systems emergency no executive could command, understand this. Everything you're about to see was set in motion by one assumption. The assumption was that calm meant weakness. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand explanations. He simply shifted his stance, placing his body between the approaching guard and his daughter, one hand resting lightly on the seat back as if measuring the aircraft's breathing. The girl's fingers were locked into his sleeve, knuckles pale, her cheek pressed into his side as the low hum of engines vibrated through the cabin floor. "I'll move," he said evenly, not to the attendant but to the fear tightening his daughter's shoulders. "It's okay." That tone, steady, almost instructional, made the guard hesitate for half a second too long. The woman watching from the forward section noticed that pause. Victoria Halden, Chief Operating Officer, had learned to read hesitation like a balance sheet. She leaned slightly into the aisle, heels planted, tailored jacket immaculate, irritation sharpening her expression. Delays irritated her. Deviations annoyed her. And scenes like this, unfolding in front of paying passengers, offended her sense of control. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked, already knowing the answer she expected. "He was seated in a restricted row," the attendant said quickly. "Said it was assigned." Victoria's gaze dropped, not to his face but to his work boots, scuffed and practical, then to the faint grease stain on his sleeve. Maintenance, contract labor, necessary, invisible. Her decision formed before he finished adjusting the strap of his daughter's backpack. "Escort them back," she said. "We're pushing late." The engine's pitch shifted slightly as the plane began final taxi. The sound was subtle, almost swallowed by the murmur of the cabin, but his eyes lifted at once. Not in alarm, more like recognition. He felt it through the soles of his boots, a vibration out of rhythm, a whisper where there should have been silence. "Hold on," he said, quiet but firm. The guard frowned. "Sir, just a second," he repeated, and pressed his palm flat against the overhead panel as if listening through bone. The girl looked up at him, wide-eyed. "Daddy?" "It's okay," he murmured. "Just stay right here." A flicker of annoyance crossed Victoria's face. "This isn't negotiable." He met her eyes then, not defiant, not pleading, focused. Something's off. That earned a short, humorless laugh from someone nearby. A few passengers shifted, phones half raised, curiosity mixing with impatience. Authority was being challenged, and everyone could feel it. The plane lurched, not violently, just enough to rattle tray tables. A warning chime sounded from the forward cabin. The attendant stiffened. The guard's hand dropped from his radio. Victoria's smile thinned. "Captain?" No answer came immediately. Another chime followed, sharper this time, and the hum beneath their feet changed pitch again, uneven now. He was already moving, not forward, not back, but sideways, clearing space, guiding his daughter into the seat behind him. His eyes tracked the ceiling panels, the subtle tremor traveling along the fuselage like a pulse. "Sit," he told her softly. "Buckle up." The girl obeyed without question. She'd learned to trust that voice. A muffled announcement crackled, then cut. The cabin noise swelled, nervous energy rising like a static. Victoria felt it then, not fear, but something colder. Uncertainty. He looked toward the front again. "You've got a sensor cascade," he said, not loudly, but with certainty. "Left side redundancy isn't talking to the main bus." The attendant stared. "How would you—" Another jolt interrupted her. Silence fell in a tight circle around him. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself as the aircraft shuddered once more, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Victoria Halden didn't speak. She watched him brace one hand against the seat, listening to the machine beneath them, as if it were something alive and familiar. And somewhere between the wrong seat and the wrong assumption, the balance of power began to shift. The shift wasn't loud or dramatic. It came as a tightening in the air, a collective breath held too long. The engines continued their uneven hum, and that alone told him more than any flashing indicator could have. He kept his hand on the seat back, fingers spread, feeling the vibration travel through metal and bone. "Captain, respond," Victoria said sharply toward the intercom, authority edging toward strain. Static answered her. Then a clipped voice broke through, incomplete, distorted. The words didn't matter as much as the tone. Controlled, but fighting it. Someone up front was working hard not to panic. The attendant glanced between them. "Sir, please return to your seat." He didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head, listening again, eyes unfocused now, as if the cabin had faded, and only the aircraft remained. "That's not turbulence," he said. "That's feedback. Something's looping." A few rows back, a man scoffed under his breath. "Everyone's a pilot now." He ignored it. His attention was already mapping the systems in his head, old habits waking up without ceremony. The plane wasn't in danger yet, but it was close enough to feel it in his chest. Victoria stepped closer, heels clicking once, twice, stopping just short of him. "You're causing disruption," she said. "Sit down." He finally looked at her again. "I'm trying to prevent a bigger one." Another jolt rippled through the cabin, stronger this time. A gasp rose from somewhere near the wing. Overhead, bins rattled, a sharp metallic chatter that made several passengers flinch. His daughter's seatbelt clicked as she tightened it herself, eyes never leaving him. "Daddy?" she called, small but steady. "I've got you," he said without turning. "Just like we practiced." That earned a puzzled look from the attendant. Practiced. Up front, the intercom crackled again. "Cabin crew, stand by," the captain said, voice strained but clear enough now. "We're troubleshooting a sensor disagreement." The words landed like confirmation. He took one careful step forward. The guard moved instinctively to block him, but hesitated when Victoria raised a hand. Not to allow him through, just to pause. Control, she told herself. This was about control. "What exactly do you think you know?" she asked. "Enough to know your left side air data isn't matching the inertial reference," he replied. "If the system can't reconcile it, it'll keep correcting for a problem that isn't there." Silence followed. Not disbelief this time. Calculation. A woman near the window whispered, "Is that bad?" "No," he said gently, answering her instead. "It's manageable, but it needs the right response." The captain's voice returned, sharper now. "We're seeing inconsistent readings. Stand by." Victoria's jaw tightened. She hated this. information flowing around her instead of through her. "And you can fix this?" she asked, skepticism masking something else. "I can help," he said, "if you let me talk to them." The attendant swallowed. "Ma'am." Another vibration rolled through the cabin, longer, heavier. The lights flickered, not out, just enough to be noticed. Fear bloomed openly now. A baby cried. Someone prayed aloud. Victoria looked around. This wasn't a boardroom. Optics mattered here too. She tapped her earpiece, then nodded once. "You have 1 minute," she said. "Say what you need." He exhaled, slow and grounding, then leaned toward the intercom. "Captain, if you can hear me, don't chase the numbers. You've got a false disagreement. Lock out the left ADR and fly pitch and power." There was a beat, then another. "Who is this?" the captain asked. "Someone who's seen this before," he replied. "Trust the aircraft, not the alert." The engine's pitch shifted again, but this time smoother. The vibration eased just slightly. Enough for people to notice. Enough for hope to sneak back in. Around them, whispers turned to focused silence, and before the cabin could fully absorb what was happening, let me pause here and ask you something. If you believe quiet skill matters more than titles, subscribe now so you don't miss how this unfolds. Victoria felt it too. The change. Subtle, but real. Her eyes never left him as the plane steadied, and for the first time since boarding, doubt crept into her certainty. Not about the aircraft. About the man she'd almost ordered away. The cabin didn't erupt into cheers. It exhaled instead, a long, shaky release that moved row by row as the vibration softened beneath their feet. The engines settled into a steadier rhythm, not perfect, but no longer arguing with themselves. Overhead, lights stopped flickering. The crying baby quieted to sniffles. Fear didn't vanish, but it stepped back enough for reason to breathe. He stayed where he was, hand still braced against the seat, listening. Not celebrating. Listening. The aircraft spoke in patterns, and he wasn't done hearing what it had to say. Up front, the captain's voice returned, clearer now. "We've isolated the left air data reference. Stand by." A ripple of murmurs passed through the cabin. A few passengers looked at him openly now, curiosity replacing irritation. Someone whispered his way, "Who is he?" Victoria didn't answer them. She was watching the way he held himself. Shoulders loose, eyes alert but calm, as if this were familiar ground. That unsettled her more than the warning chimes had. "You said, 'seen this before,'" she said quietly, stepping closer again. "Where?" He didn't look at her this time. "On planes that didn't listen," he replied. Another subtle shift ran through, the fuselage, smoother still. The aircraft responded, obedient now that the conflicting voice had been silenced. He nodded once, satisfied but cautious. The attendant leaned in, voice low. "Captain says the readings are stabilizing." "They will," he said, "as long as nobody reintroduces the fault." Victoria folded her arms, a defensive habit she rarely indulged in publicly. "You're very confident." "I'm very careful," he corrected. Behind him, his daughter unbuckled halfway, then froze, glancing up for permission. He turned just enough to catch her eye and gave a small nod. She leaned into the aisle, studying the scene with solemn attention far beyond her years. "Is it over?" she asked. "Almost," he said. "The hard part's done." Her trust landed heavier than any responsibility in the cabin. He felt it settle between his shoulders, grounding him even as the plane continued forward through open sky. Up front, the intercom clicked again. "Cabin. Crew," the captain said. "Prepare for a possible return to gate. We're evaluating." That stirred fresh anxiety. Groans, sighs, the scrape of nervous laughter. A businessman checked his watch with theatrical frustration. A woman near the wing pressed her forehead to the window, eyes closed. Victoria straightened. "We're not turning back unless we have to," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. He finally met her gaze again. "You should," he said gently. "Not because it's unsafe, but because it's honest." Her eyes narrowed. "Honest? You've got a system that disagreed with itself at altitude," he said. "You corrected it. That's good. But you don't keep flying like nothing happened." The captain's voice returned, quieter now, edged with thought. "We're considering a precautionary return. That's the right call," he said toward the ceiling. "Document it. Fix it properly." Silence followed. Then, "Understood," the captain replied. The decision settled over the cabin like a new atmosphere. Disappointment mixed with relief, but the fear eased another notch. People shifted, exhaled, accepted. The aircraft began a gentle turn, smooth and deliberate. Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Control wasn't just command, she reminded herself. It was knowing when to yield. She studied him again, this time without the filter of rank or irritation. "You said you could help," she said. "You did." He shrugged slightly. "It's what needed doing." "And you knew exactly what to say," she pressed. "Exactly how to say it." He glanced back at his daughter, now calmly rebuckling herself, then returned his attention to the aircraft. "Because I've been here before," he said, softer now. A flight attendant approached, eyes bright with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Sir, thank you." He nodded once, accepting it without ceremony. Around them, the cabin resumed its low murmur. Phones lowered. Tension loosened its grip. But something fundamental had shifted. Eyes followed him now, not with suspicion, but with respect. Victoria felt it too. The social gravity had changed, pulling attention away from titles and toward competence. She didn't like how exposed that made her feel. As the plane leveled into its return path, she extended a hand. "I owe you an apology," she said, "and an explanation." He looked at her hand, then at her face. "Later," he said. "Right now, let them land." She withdrew her hand slowly, nodding. For once, she agreed. The aircraft moved steadily now, obedient and calm. And as the ground drew closer, one truth became unavoidable. The wrong assumption had nearly cost them everything. The aircraft descended in a wide, controlled arc, sunlight shifting across the cabin as the angle changed. The steady hum returned, almost comforting now, but nobody mistook it for normal. This was the quiet, after something had nearly gone wrong. People spoke in low voices, as if the plane itself might overhear and change its mind. He finally eased back into the aisle seat beside his daughter, though his posture stayed alert. Shoulders squared, attention half on her and half on the vibration beneath the floor. She leaned into him without hesitation, her head fitting neatly against his arm like it had always belonged there. Her breathing slowed, syncing with his. "Is it okay now?" she whispered. "It's getting there," he said. "You did great." She nodded, absorbing that praise with serious pride, then looked past him toward the front. "They were really mad at you." A faint smile touched his mouth. Sometimes people get mad when things don't go the way they expect. Up the aisle, Victoria Halden remained standing, one hand braced against a seatback as if grounding herself. The cabin crew moved with renewed purpose now, voices softer, steps more deliberate. Authority had shifted, and everyone felt it, even if no one named it out loud. She turned slightly, addressing the nearest attendant. "Once we land, I want a full technical report," she said. "Every detail." "Yes, ma'am." The attendant hesitated, then added, "The captain asked, who spoke to him?" Victoria's eyes flicked toward the middle of the cabin again. "I'll handle it." Her heels clicked softly as she walked back down the aisle, the crowd parting without being asked. She stopped beside his row, not looming this time, not commanding space, just standing there, measured and thoughtful. "You should have been listened to sooner," she said quietly. He didn't respond right away. He watched the wing through the window across the aisle, tracking the flaps as they adjusted, smooth and precise. Only when they settled did he look up at her. "People usually don't listen," he said. "They look." "And what did you look like to me?" she asked, testing the question. He considered it. "Someone easy to move?" That landed harder than she expected. Victoria inhaled slowly, then nodded once. "You're right." The plane shuddered gently as it passed through a thin layer of cloud. Applause broke out somewhere near the back. Tentative at first, then spreading, a release of energy more than celebration. He didn't join in, he didn't stop it either. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calmer now, confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Thank you for your patience." A few passengers glanced toward him again, expressions open, curious, grateful. One man gave him a thumbs up. A woman mouthed thank you. He acknowledged them with small nods, nothing more. Victoria watched those interactions carefully. She was used to being the focal point, the one people deferred to, the one whose presence changed rooms. Seeing that attention bend toward someone else unsettled her, but it also clarified something she'd spent years ignoring. "You knew exactly what to do," she said, without hesitation. "Because hesitation gets people hurt," he replied. His daughter shifted, peeking around his arm at Victoria. "Are you the boss?" she asked bluntly. Victoria blinked, then smiled despite herself. "Something like that." The girl nodded, satisfied. "My dad fixes things." He chuckled softly, a sound that loosened something tight in his chest. "I help," he corrected. The landing gear deployed with a solid thump, vibrations changing again, familiar and expected this time. The runway came into view, a long stretch of certainty rushing up to meet them. Victoria stepped back as the plane touched down, smooth and controlled. Tires met asphalt, engines roared, then gradually eased. Applause broke out again. Louder now, more confident. Relief washed through the cabin in waves. As the aircraft slowed, Victoria leaned in one last time. "When we're on the ground," she said, "I'd like to talk." He met her gaze, steady and unreadable. "We'll see." The plane rolled to a stop, and with it, the illusion that rank alone kept everyone safe finally came to rest. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and the cabin shifted into a restless stillness, that strange in-between where danger has passed, but certainty hasn't returned yet. People stayed seated longer than usual, as if standing too soon might invite trouble back. He remained still, one arm around his daughter, listening to the engines spool down completely before trusting the silence. The door at the front opened with a hollow thud. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the distant sounds of ground crews and vehicles. It smelled like asphalt and rain. Normal life, waiting just outside. Victoria stood near the front, speaking quietly with the captain now visible in the doorway. The man looked exhausted, grateful, and older than he had an hour earlier. When he noticed the father in the middle rows, he gave a small nod. It wasn't protocol, it was respect. Passengers began to stand, the aisle filling slowly, cautiously. No one rushed. A few people glanced back toward him as they passed, some offering quiet words, others just a look that said enough. He accepted all of it the same way, without ceremony. "Daddy," his daughter said softly. "Are we in trouble?" "No," he said. "We're going home." She smiled at that, relief spreading across her face in a way that made his chest tighten. That was the victory that mattered. Everything else was noise. Victoria waited until the aisle cleared, then walked back again, stopping beside their row. Her posture had changed. No edge, no performance, just a woman recalibrating. "The maintenance lead wants to speak with you," she said. "So does our safety team." He looked up at her. "After they secure the plane." "They're already doing it," she replied. "Because of what you flagged." He nodded once. "Good." She hesitated, then asked, "How did you know it was the left side so quickly?" He considered the question, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small worn notebook. The cover was creased, the edges softened by years of use. He flipped it open just enough to show a diagram, hand-drawn, precise. "I write things down," he said. "Patterns stick better that way." Her eyes lingered on the sketches longer than politeness required. "That's not a hobbyist's drawing." "No," he agreed. The implication hung between them, heavy but unspoken. She didn't push. Not yet. As they stood to disembark, a mechanic in a reflective vest paused near their row, staring openly now. "You the one who called the ADR issue?" he asked. "Yes," he replied. The mechanic let out a low whistle. "Saved us a real mess." He shrugged. "Saved everyone." They stepped into the jet bridge together, the air cooler, louder. Victoria walked beside him, matching his pace unconsciously. Around. "Them," employees whispered, eyes tracking him with a mix of curiosity and dawning awareness. "You don't work for us," she said, not a question. "No. But you've worked on aircraft like this." "Yes." She stopped walking. He stopped too. His daughter looked between them, sensing weight without understanding it. "You didn't just help," Victoria said. "You prevented a cascade failure that would have grounded half our fleet until we found the root cause." "That's what cascade failures do," he said simply. Her expression shifted then, something like humility cutting through habit. "I misjudged you." He met her gaze steadily. "You judged what you saw." They stood there, engine silent behind them, the plane safely secured. The crisis contained not by authority, but by competence. If this moment resonates with you, if you believe real skill often goes unseen until it's needed most, subscribe now so you don't miss how this reckoning unfolds. Victoria inhaled slowly. "We need people like you," she said. "People who notice." He adjusted his daughter's backpack strap, grounding himself in the small, familiar motion. "Then start noticing them before something breaks." She nodded. No argument, no defense. As they walked toward the terminal, the distance between labor and leadership felt smaller than it had an hour ago. Not erased, just narrowed by truth. They entered the terminal through a side corridor usually reserved for staff, not passengers. The walls were plain, the lighting functional, the hum of operations louder here, radios chirping, carts rattling, footsteps echoing with purpose. This was the space beneath the polish, where the airport actually breathed. He felt more at ease the moment they stepped into it. A safety manager fell into step beside Victoria, murmuring updates she half listened to. Her attention kept drifting back to him, to the way his eyes tracked exits, equipment, people. Not nervously, professionally. His daughter tugged gently at his hand. Are we still flying? Not today, he said. We'll get a different ride. She accepted that without complaint, gaze wandering instead to the flashing lights of a service vehicle passing by. Okay. That quiet trust grounded him again. He reminded himself to keep breathing. They were led into a modest conference room. No glass walls, no branding displays. A long table, a whiteboard. A faint smell of coffee that had burned hours ago. 3 engineers waited inside, one already pulling up system logs on a tablet. "Thank you for coming," the oldest of them said. "We'd like to understand exactly what you noticed." He took the seat closest to the door, habit more than intention, and pulled the notebook back out. He didn't launch into credentials, didn't posture. He just turned the pages and pointed. The vibration frequency didn't match turbulence, he explained. It was harmonic. That told me 2 systems were arguing. When the alert came through fragmented, I knew it wasn't a primary failure. It was translation. The engineers leaned in despite themselves. Pens moved, screens shifted. Victoria watched it all, silent. "And you were sure it wasn't pilot error?" one asked. "Yes," he said, "because the correction lag didn't fit human response time." That earned a look. Respect, this time unguarded. Victoria cleared her throat. "How long have you been doing this?" He closed the notebook. "Long enough." She nodded slowly, then surprised everyone by sitting down across from him, folding her hands on the table. "I'm going to ask you something directly," she said, "and I want an honest answer." He met her gaze. "You'll get one. Why are you doing contract maintenance work?" The room went quiet. Even the engineers paused, sensing this was no longer about systems. He glanced at his daughter, now coloring quietly in the corner with a borrowed marker. Then back to Victoria. "Because it lets me be home," he said. "Because it doesn't follow me after hours, and because it keeps a roof over our heads without taking all of me." Victoria absorbed that. Something shifting behind her eyes. She'd optimized her life for scale and growth, not margin and presence. The contrast unsettled her. "You could do more," she said. "I already am," he replied. "Just not where you were looking." The safety manager cleared his throat. "With your permission, we'd like to include your input in our incident report." "You can," he said. "Just don't turn it into a headline." That earned a faint smile from one of the engineers. Victoria stood. "We're done here," she said. "Thank you." As they exited back into the terminal proper, passengers from the earlier flight milled nearby, rebooking, calling loved ones, resuming lives that had almost tilted off course. A few recognized him. Now, word had traveled. One woman approached hesitantly. "You're the one who helped," she said. He nodded. She pressed her hand to her chest. "Thank you. My son was on that plane." He glanced at his daughter, then back at her. "I know." The woman's eyes filled. She stepped back, overcome, and disappeared into the crowd. Victoria watched that exchange, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "We build these systems assuming hierarchy will save us." He adjusted his jacket. "Hierarchy doesn't listen," he said. "People do." They reached the terminal doors, sunlight spilling in, loud and alive. The crisis was over, officially logged and contained, but its echo lingered, reshaping things in ways no report would capture. As they stepped outside together, Victoria slowed, matching his pace. "This isn't finished," she said. He didn't deny it. He just nodded once, feeling the weight of what was coming settle. Not as fear, but as inevitability. The aircraft was safe. The truth, however, was just starting to taxi into view. Outside the terminal, the noise rushed in to fill the quiet they'd been walking through. Buses hissed, carts beeped, rain-speckled wind pushed against glass. Life didn't pause for near misses. It simply rerouted. He stopped just beyond the doors, instinctively scanning, then relaxed when he saw nothing requiring attention. His daughter slipped her hand into his, warm and steady. That small weight anchored him more than gravity ever could. Victoria stood beside him, phone in hand, unread notifications stacking like unopened files. For once, she didn't check them. She watched the crowd instead, watched how people moved when no one was directing them. "You're not wrong," she said at last. "About hierarchy." He gave a short nod. "It has its place. But not everywhere," she finished. A black sedan waited at the curb, engine idling, door already opening as soon as her assistant spotted her. The familiar choreography of power resumed around her without effort. She hesitated, then waved the driver back. The door closed softly. The pause was deliberate. "I want to understand something," she said, "not for the company, for me." He glanced at her, then back toward the terminal, where the plane's tail was just visible through glass. Understanding usually costs something. "I'm aware," she replied. They walked a few steps farther, stopping near a low concrete barrier where airport workers took breaks between shifts. A man in a reflective vest nodded to him in passing. Recognition again. It was spreading. "When you spoke up," Victoria said, "you didn't sound like someone trying to prove anything." "Because I wasn't." "You sounded like someone who already knew the outcome." He considered that. "I knew the process," he said. "Outcomes are never guaranteed." She absorbed that quietly. The wind tugged at her jacket, flattening it against her frame, stripping away some of its authority. "You could have stayed silent," she said. "Let us handle it. Let the system work." "Yes," he agreed. "And if the system failed, my daughter would have been sitting right there." The words landed without accusation, just fact. Victoria looked at the girl, now crouched near the barrier, drawing shapes in the condensation with her finger. The future made visible. "I don't have children," she said suddenly. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. "I chose differently," she continued. "I told myself I'd do the most good by being in charge." "And maybe you have," he said. "But being in charge doesn't mean you see everything." Her jaw tightened, not in anger but recognition. "No," she admitted, "it doesn't." A ground crew vehicle rolled past, its operator raising a hand in greeting toward him. He returned it automatically. Muscle memory. "You're respected." "Here," she observed. "By people who do the work," he replied. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable. Processing silence, the kind that changes shape as thoughts realign. Inside the terminal, an announcement echoed about rebookings and vouchers. Business resumed. The machine recovered. But something inside Victoria didn't reset so easily. "I owe you more than an apology," she said finally. He looked at her then, really looked. Saw the woman beneath the title, recalculating a lifetime of assumptions. "You don't owe me," he said. "You owe them?" He nodded toward the workers moving steadily in the background. She followed his gaze. For the first time, she didn't look past them. "I built my career on efficiency," she said, "on trusting metrics, on believing the structure would compensate for individual blind spots. And sometimes it does," he said, "until it doesn't." Her phone vibrated again. This time, she checked it. Read, exhaled. "The board wants a briefing," she said. "They want to know who intervened." He stiffened slightly, a reflex he didn't bother hiding. "I won't give them your name," she added quickly. "Not without your consent." He relaxed. "Thank you." "But they will ask," she continued, "and this won't disappear." "I didn't expect it to," he said. His daughter stood and brushed her hands on her jeans. "Can we go get food now?" she asked. He smiled down at her. "Yeah," he said, "we can." Victoria watched that exchange, something like longing flickering across her face before she masked it. "Take care of her," she said softly. "I always do." She nodded, then stepped back, creating distance again, but this time it felt intentional, respectful. The sedan door opened once more, waiting. As she turned to leave, she paused. "You were right about one more thing," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Assumptions," she said. "They're dangerous." She walked away then, heels clicking, power reclaiming its familiar shape. But it was altered now, carrying a new weight. He took his daughter's hand and headed toward the parking structure, blending back into the flow of ordinary people. The crisis had passed. The aircraft was grounded. The parking structure swallowed them in concrete and echo, the sound of their footsteps bouncing off pillars marked with fading paint. He liked places like this. Functional, honest, built to hold weight without asking who you were. His daughter skipped one step ahead, the crisis already filing itself away into memory as something that had happened and ended. He unlocked the car and paused, hand resting on the door. The adrenaline was finally bleeding off, leaving behind a familiar ache in his shoulders and a tightness behind his eyes. Not fear, responsibility releasing its grip. "Daddy," she said, climbing into her seat, "were you scared?" He considered lying, then didn't. "A little," he said, "but I knew what to do." She smiled, buckling herself in. "That's my favorite kind of brave." The words settled deep. He closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side, the weight of what almost happened still following him like a shadow. Inside the car, the quiet felt earned. His phone buzzed as soon as the engine turned over, unknown number. He stared at it for a moment, then let it ring out. The second call came before he reached the exit ramp. He sighed and answered. "Yes." "This is the airline safety office," a man said, voice careful, measured. "We'd like to formally document your intervention. I already spoke to your engineers. We'd like to go further." He merged into traffic, eyes on the road. "Further how?" "There are protocols," the man said. "Recommendations, potential consulting arrangements." He glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She was humming softly, watching the city slide past. "I'm not interested in arrangements," he said. "I'm interested in fixes." A pause. "Those usually come together." "Not always," he replied. The call ended politely, unresolved. He set the phone face down, a small but deliberate act. They stopped at a diner near the highway, the kind with vinyl booths and laminated menus. Familiar ground. The waitress recognized them and poured water without asking. Normality returned in layers. As they waited for food, his phone buzzed again. A text this time. A name he hadn't seen in years. Someone from a past life, forwarded by someone else. Word traveled fast when systems were embarrassed. "You still saving people quietly?" He stared at the screen, then typed back a single word. "Trying." Across town, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the runway, Victoria Halden stood before a long table of suited figures. Screens behind her displayed data, charts, timelines. She didn't look at them yet. "What we experienced today," she said, "was not a failure of equipment alone. It was a failure of attention." A murmur rippled. Someone shifted uncomfortably. "We had someone on board with the exact knowledge required," she continued. and we almost removed him because he didn't fit our expectations. That's not standard procedure, a board member said. No, Victoria replied. It's culture. She let that sit, then added, I've ordered a review, not of the aircraft, of us. Back at the diner, he paid the bill and slid out of the booth, his daughter trailing behind. As they stepped outside, the late afternoon sun caught the hood of the car, warm and ordinary. If you're still with this story, if you believe moments like these matter more than headlines, subscribe now, because what comes next is about accountability, not applause. He opened the trunk and pulled out his jacket, the same one with the worn notebook tucked inside. He hesitated, then took the notebook out and held it for a moment. It wasn't a relic, it was a tool, and tools were meant to be used. His phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Victoria herself. We need to talk, not as executives, as people responsible for what happens next. He exhaled slowly, the road ahead stretching into something inevitable. He typed back, Tomorrow. Public place. She replied almost instantly. Agreed. He slid the notebook back into his jacket and closed the trunk. His daughter climbed into the car, swinging her legs. Are you going to fix more things? She asked. He smiled, starting the engine. Maybe, he said, but not alone. As they pulled back onto the road, the city lights flickered on one by one, systems humming, people moving, assumptions waiting to be challenged. The crisis had revealed him. What came next would test everyone else. The cafe sat across from the terminal rail line, all glass and steel softened by plants that clung stubbornly to corners. It was neutral ground, public enough to keep intentions clean, quiet enough to talk without an audience. He arrived early out of habit, chose a table with his back to the wall, and ordered tea instead of coffee. Clarity mattered today. His daughter sat beside him, swinging her feet, coloring again. Routine anchored her. It anchored him too. When Victoria arrived, she didn't bring an entourage, no assistant, no phone pressed to her ear. Just a coat draped over one arm and a face that looked more human than corporate for once. She spotted him quickly and walked over, her pace measured but not hesitant. Thank you for meeting me, she said, taking the seat across from him. He nodded. You said public. I meant transparent, she replied. This seemed close enough. They sat in silence for a moment, the low murmur of other conversations filling the space. Trains passed outside with a rhythmic rush, reminding them both how many systems moved unseen every day. I spoke to the board, Victoria began. I didn't use your name. I know, he said. She raised an eyebrow. How? Because if you had, there'd be 3 people here instead of 1, he replied. A small, reluctant smile touched her mouth. Fair. She leaned forward slightly. I want to be clear about something. Yesterday wasn't just a scare, it exposed a gap in how we operate, not technically, culturally. He watched her closely, weighing intent. Culture doesn't change because of one meeting. No, she agreed, but it can start because of one moment. His daughter looked up from her coloring. Are you the airplane boss? She asked again, blunt as ever. Victoria laughed softly this time. Yes, I guess I am. The girl nodded, satisfied, then returned to her page. That moment, Victoria continued, lowering her voice, was when you spoke up and we almost shut you down. I keep replaying it. So do I, he said. Then you understand why. I'm here, she said. I don't want this to end with a thank you and a report. What do you want it to end with? He asked. Change, she said simply. He leaned back, folding his arms. Change usually costs people their comfort. I'm prepared for that, she replied. Others won't be. That's the problem, he said. You can't order humility. She nodded slowly. No, but I can create space for it. Outside, a train roared past, briefly drowning out the cafe's sounds. When it cleared, she spoke again. I want you to help us redesign how frontline observations are escalated, she said. Not as a consultant, as a counterweight. He considered the offer carefully. I don't want a title. I know, she said. That's why I'm asking. His daughter shifted closer, leaning against his side. He rested a hand on her shoulder automatically. I won't be in meetings all day, he said. I won't disappear into presentations. I wouldn't ask you to, Victoria replied. I want you where you are, where power doesn't usually look. He studied her for a long moment. And when someone like me speaks up again, I'll listen, she said, and I'll make sure others do too. That's a promise, he said, not a question. Yes, she replied. In front of witnesses if you want. A corner of his mouth lifted. Good. They fell quiet again, the weight of the decision settling between them. This wasn't a contract. It was a test of character. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the notebook, placing it on the table between them. The worn cover looked out of place against polished steel and ceramic cups. This, he said, tapping it once, is how I work. I notice, I write, I follow patterns. If I do this, it's on my terms. Victoria looked at the notebook, then back at him. Agreed. She stood, extending her hand. Not as an executive this time, as an equal asking for trust. He stood too and shook it once, firmly. Then we start small, he said. Where? She asked. He glanced toward the terminal, where planes taxied in steady lines, where people are told to stay quiet. She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. As she turned to leave, she paused. One more thing, she said. The captain asked about you again. He wants to meet. He shook his head. Not yet. Why not? Because next time, he said, I want him listening before the alarm sounds. Victoria smiled, genuine this time. Fair. She walked away, blending into the crowd. He watched her go, then looked down at his daughter. You hungry again? He asked. She grinned. Always. He laughed softly, gathering their things. Outside, another plane lifted into the sky, engines roaring with confidence restored. The system had survived. Now it would be asked to learn. The next morning didn't announce, itself with drama. No headlines, no alerts. Just a gray sky and the steady rhythm of routine returning, layer by layer. He walked his daughter to school like any other day, held the door while she ran ahead, watched until she disappeared inside before turning back toward the parking lot. Only then did he let his shoulders drop. His phone buzzed as he reached the car. This time, the number wasn't unknown. Morning, Victoria said when he answered. Her voice was different today, less guarded, more deliberate. Are you near the airport? 10 minutes out, he replied. Good, I didn't want to do this over email. He knew what this was before she finished the sentence. Systems always caught up eventually. They met in a glass-walled operations center overlooking the runways. Planes moved in choreographed precision below, white lines and blinking lights guiding thousands of decisions every hour. Inside, the room smelled faintly of ozone and coffee, screens alive with data. This was the heart of the machine. Several people were already there when he arrived. Engineers, safety leads. 2 executives he didn't recognize, their expressions polite but assessing. The captain from the previous day stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. Conversation stopped when he entered. "This is him," Victoria said simply. No titles, no embellishment. The captain turned, studying him with open curiosity now, not tension. "You were right," he said, "about everything." He nodded. "You handled it well." The captain exhaled. "Because you told me how." Victoria gestured toward the table. "We ran the full diagnostics overnight. Your assessment matched the data within a fraction of a percent." One of the executives leaned forward. "We'd like to understand your background." The question hovered, inevitable at last. He didn't rush to answer. He looked at the screens, the aircraft icons moving smoothly now, the systems stabilized, because someone had listened in time. Then he spoke. "I was an Air Force avionics engineer," he said. "Flight control redundancy, failure analysis. I spent years training for moments most people hope never come." The room stilled. The words recalibrated everything. "You left," the executive said carefully. "Yes." "Why?" He thought of his daughter's voice in the cabin, of her hand in his sleeve. "Because I wanted my work to end when my day ended," he said. "And because not all service wears the same uniform." The captain nodded slowly. "I should have recognized it," he said. "The way you spoke." "Recognition isn't the problem," he replied. "Listening is." Victoria watched the exchange, absorbing the shift. This was the reversal she'd sensed coming, now fully in the open. The underestimation had nowhere left to hide. "We're implementing changes," she said, "immediate ones. Frontline escalation protocols, anonymous reporting, without rank filters, mandatory response windows." One executive frowned. "That will slow things down." "It will save lives," she replied flatly. Silence followed, then reluctant nods. The captain stepped forward. "I want him involved," he said, "in training, in simulations, not as a guest speaker, as someone who's been there." All eyes turned back to him. He held up a hand. "I won't be your mascot," he said calmly, "and I won't disappear into your culture and soften the message." "That's exactly why we need you," Victoria said. He met her gaze. This was the peak of it. The moment where dignity either got folded back into bureaucracy or stood its ground. "I'll help," he said, "on one condition." The executives leaned in. "You don't attach my worth to my past," he continued. "You don't say I mattered because of what I used to be. You say I mattered because I paid attention." Victoria smiled, slow and sincere. "Agreed." The captain extended his hand. This time, when they shook, it felt like equals acknowledging a shared responsibility. By midday, the first internal memo circulated. No names at first, just a clear account of what happened, what was missed, and why it mattered. Employees read it on break rooms, on phones, in quiet corners where labor lived. The ripple spread outward, subtle but undeniable. He left before the afternoon rush, stepping back into sunlight and noise, the runway fading behind him. The work wasn't done, but the truth had landed in public space where it couldn't be buried. That evening, he picked his daughter up from school. She ran to him, backpack bouncing. "Did you fix the airplanes?" she asked. He smiled. "I helped them listen." She considered that, then nodded. "That's good." As they walked to the car together, he felt something rare settle in his chest. Not triumph, not pride. Vindication. Not because he'd been revealed as important, but because he'd proven that quiet competence, when finally heard, could change the direction of an entire system. The following week unfolded without spectacle, which was exactly how change usually began. No press conferences, no triumphant announcements, just quiet adjustments rippling through places most people never noticed. He felt it first in the maintenance bay where technicians paused to listen instead of brushing past. Then in the break room, where a junior inspector spoke up and wasn't shut down. Small shifts, real ones. He kept his routine intact, mornings with his daughter, evenings at home. The work in between expanded, but it didn't consume him. He refused to let it. That boundary mattered more now than ever. On Friday afternoon, he was called back to the airport. Not to a boardroom or an operations center, but to a hangar usually reserved for night crews. The doors were open, sunlight spilling across concrete and steel. Rows of workers stood loosely gathered, some in uniforms, some in grease-stained coveralls, others with tablets tucked under their arms. This was not a staged audience. This was the workforce. Victoria stood near the nose of a parked aircraft. No podium, no microphone. When she saw him approach, she stepped aside instead of forward. The gesture was deliberate. "Thank you all for being here," she said, voice carrying without amplification. "I asked you to come because what happened last week wasn't just an incident. It was a mirror." Murmurs spread, curious, attentive. "We rely on systems," she continued, "on procedures, on hierarchy, and most days that works. But last week we were reminded that systems fail when people stop listening to each other." She turned slightly toward him, then back to the group. "Someone in this room spoke up when it mattered, not because it was their job, because it was their responsibility." Eyes shifted. Some recognized him now, others didn't. It didn't matter. "He didn't save the aircraft by outranking anyone," Victoria said. "He saved it by paying attention, and by refusing to stay quiet when staying quiet would have been easier." Silence held, thick and focused. "We're changing how we operate," she said. "Effective immediately. Frontline observations carry weight. Escalations will be answered, and no one will be dismissed because they don't look like leadership." A ripple moved through the crowd, something like relief. She stepped back fully then, clearing space. "This isn't about him," she added. "It's about all of you." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then steady. He felt it wash past him, not toward him. Exactly right. Afterward, workers drifted back to their tasks, conversations buzzing. A mechanic clapped him on the shoulder. An engineer nodded with quiet respect. A young technician asked a question and waited for the answer without rushing. The culture was shifting, not because of him, but because someone had finally acknowledged it needed to. Victoria approached as the hangar emptied. "That went better than I expected," she said. "It usually does," he replied, "when people feel seen." She studied him for a moment. "You know this puts a target on your back." He shrugged lightly. "I've carried heavier." She smiled, not amused, but appreciative. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I," he said. They walked together toward the exit, footsteps echoing. Outside, planes taxied, engines humming in disciplined rhythm. The system moved, adjusted, learned. Later that evening, he sat at the kitchen table while his daughter did homework, the notebook open beside him. He added a few lines, not diagrams this time, but words, reminders, observations, things worth holding on to. She looked up at him suddenly. "Are you famous now?" He laughed softly. "No." "Good," she said. "I like you like this." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "Me too." As night settled, messages came in from people he hadn't heard from in years. Colleagues, former teammates, quiet acknowledgments. He answered some, let others sit. The work would speak louder than any reply. Before bed, he stood by the window, watching planes lift into the dark, lights blinking steadily as they climbed. Each one carried people who trusted systems they'd never see. That trust felt heavier now, but also clearer. He hadn't sought recognition. He'd sought safety, dignity, a future where his daughter wouldn't have to raise her voice to be heard. Down in the quiet street below, a car passed, then another. Ordinary life continued, unaware of how close it had come to tilting. He turned off the light and went to bed, knowing the story wasn't about what he'd been revealed as. It was about what happens when someone ordinary refuses to stay silent, and the world finally listens. Morning light crept through the curtains in thin, deliberate lines, settling across the floor like it was taking inventory. He lay awake before the alarm, listening to the quiet hum of the house, the kind of silence that only existed when nothing urgent was demanding his attention. For the first time in a long while, that silence didn't feel temporary. In the kitchen, he packed a lunch while his daughter tied her shoes, humming softly to herself. The crisis had already begun to fade for her, shrinking into a story she'd tell later, framed by trust instead of fear. That, more than anything, told him they'd done something right. "Are you coming to the school thing today?" she asked, not looking up. "I'll be there," he said, "front row." She grinned, satisfied, and slung her backpack over one shoulder. Good. They stepped outside together, the air cool and ordinary. No sirens, no alerts. Just another day moving forward. At work, the changes were subtle but unmistakable. A supervisor paused before dismissing a concern. A checklist included a new line, observer notes. Someone asked him a question and waited for the answer. These weren't victories you could point to. They were the kind that lasted. Around midday, his phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. "The first review's in. People are speaking up. Some are uncomfortable. That's how I know it's working." He read it once, then typed back. "Good. Discomfort means they're paying attention." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned to the task at hand, hands steady, mind clear. He hadn't become the center of anything. He'd helped realign it. Later, as promised, he stood in a school auditorium, watching his daughter step onto a small stage with her classmates. She scanned the crowd, spotted him instantly, and waved. He waved back, heart full in a way no professional recognition could ever touch. When she finished, she ran straight to him. "Did you see me?" "I wouldn't miss it," he said. As they walked home, she asked, "Why did that lady listen to you on the plane?" He considered the question carefully. "Because I spoke when it mattered," he said, "and because I didn't let anyone tell me I didn't belong." She thought about that, then nodded, filing it away for a future he hoped would be kinder to her than the present had been to so many. That evening, he opened the notebook one last time and added a final entry for the week. Not technical, personal. Never confuse quiet with weakness. Never confuse authority with understanding. He closed it and set it aside. Somewhere across the city, planes rose and fell in practiced rhythm, crews working in concert, systems humming with renewed awareness. Not perfect, never perfect, but listening now in ways they hadn't before. He knew the change wouldn't erase every injustice. It never did. But it had drawn a line, visible now, between arrogance and responsibility. And once seen, lines like that were hard to ignore. Before turning out the light, he checked his phone one last time. Messages from strangers had slowed, replaced by something better, routine, stability. The quiet satisfaction of having done what was necessary and then stepping back. He looked down the hallway toward his daughter's room, listened to her breathing, even and calm. That was the real measure, not applause, not titles, just knowing she'd seen what dignity looked like when tested. And if this story stayed with you, if moments like this remind you how often the wrong people are overlooked, ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. You're at the wrong table, Single Dad said softly. The heiress slowly looked up and trembled. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next? He turned off the light. Outside, the world kept moving, unaware of how many times it was saved by people it almost ignored.